Welcome to the political playoffs, the March Madness of Colorado's election season. November may feel really far away, but right now candidates are working hard to earn their spot on the June primary ballot. I'm your host, Brenda Morrison, and if you're thinking, ugh, another political podcast, stay with us, because today we're talking with two women, Jessica Killin and Zuri Horowitz. Both are vying to represent the Pikes Peak Region in Congress, and this conversation is going to be relevant, informative, interesting, and maybe a little fun.
You're listening to Studio 809 Podcast. This is what community sounds like.
Welcome to Elevating Pikes Peak Women, a podcast that amplifies the voices of women in our community.
A quick note, there are other Democrats in this race, but because this podcast is all about elevating women, today we're featuring women candidates. And in the interest of fairness, both candidates are being asked the same question. Before we jump in with our first guest, Jessica Killin, here's a quick version of how candidates get on the primary ballot in Colorado. There are two paths. One is through the caucus and assembly process, where party members meet in small groups, community meetings, called neighborhood caucuses, to choose delegates who then vote on which candidates move forward. The other is by petition, collecting signatures from registered party members. Why does this matter now? Because caucuses are happening, and if you want to participate and learn more about your local meeting or what's called your local caucus, check with your county political party or the Colorado Secretary of State to get more information. But one caveat is you must be registered as a Democrat or as a Republican to participate in the caucus system. Two routes, one goal, earning a place on the ballot. And with that, let's get started. I'm going to ask Jessica one or two policy questions and then break it up with a fun question.
Great.
Is that okay with you?
Yeah, thanks. And thanks for having me, Brenda. I really appreciate it. Thanks so much.
You are welcome.
Yeah.
So, in 1 minute, Jessica, tell us, why do you want this job when everybody else is leaving? All those incumbents are saying, I'm out of here. And you're saying, I'm in.
Well, Jeff Crank isn't saying he's out of here, so we need to get him out of here. I'm running because, first and foremost, I am a patriot, and I love my country, and I love Colorado, and I love El Paso County. This is the community that raised me, and we deserve more and better than what Jeff Crank and Donald Trump are delivering for this community and for our country. As a kid who grew up here on the east side of Colorado Springs and lived my version of the American dream, I just know that there are too many people in our community and across our country who feel the American dream is out of reach, and the Crank-Trump policies are only making that worse. And I am focused on, as we are on the eve of our 250th birthday as a country, bringing back competence, courage, and character to Congress.
Well, thank you. So you and I are both Colorado Springs native types.
Yep.
You grew on the east side. I grew up on the west side. So
right.
We have a lot in common. Well, you gave me a great segue.
Yep.
Because you just talked about the American dream being out of reach, how people are struggling. So our first topic is talking about healthcare. Mm-hmm. We're going to be talking about today for our listeners issues that impact women, specifically in the Pikes Peak region.
Yep.
So let's talk about healthcare.
Okay.
And so if you're in King Soopers, checking out the prices of eggs or beef or produce, and some you're recognized, and somebody says, hey, I'm working part-time. I don't qualify for Medicaid. Mm-hmm. I can't afford private insurance on the ACA or the marketplace. How are you going to help me? What's Congress going to do to help me?
Yep. That is exactly a great example of how our system is failing regular people. And how Jeff Crank and his votes are failing regular people in our community. This gap that we have between people who are Medicaid eligible and also how insurance premiums have skyrocketed and are continuing to skyrocket and become completely unaffordable. A couple things that we have to do right away is reinstate the Affordable Care Act subsidies. And I think it's important to note that Jeff Crank voted against extending those subsidies. We also need to ensure, we've watched the Affordable Care Act get chipped away at by the Republican Party for well over a decade now, and it's not working as a law for most people. And so we need to have people in Congress like me who will shore up the Affordable Care Act, ensure that we have a system that actually works for most people, and also create some one idea I have in terms of addressing that particular gap, that Medicaid gap, is creating some federal policies, tax incentives at the state level that states then can create programs that will help fill that gap. And also we need to work when we shore up the Affordable Care Act and we work on shoring up, I think eventually we should work toward a true public option that actually works for more Americans. But in the short term, making sure that we have some low cost catastrophic options that will work for women like that.
Thank you. And just for our listeners, because I know it gets confusing, there's a difference between Medicare and Medicaid.
Yep.
And Medicare is what all Americans receive usually when they turn 65. Medicaid is different. That serves our vulnerable populations. It's income qualified and our disabled populations. So just so everyone out there makes sure that we're not talking about Medicare, we are talking about Medicaid. So now we have a little fun question. We'll see if
love it.
Okay. Talking about your binge watching. Is it Bridgerton or The Diplomat?
Oh geez. I've watched both. I'll say right now. I've watched both of them. I like them both. My husband and I are really into The Pit right now, if you haven't seen that, so
you took another question away.
Okay,
so
sorry.
So woman after my own heart. I've watched both, but my husband and I watched Diplomat together, and I watched Bridgerton by myself.
Yeah, Raj, my husband, is definitely not watching Bridgerton.
Yeah, it's a solo. It's a solo watch. Yeah. All right. Well, good to know. Good to know. So keeping into the Medicaid theme, as part of the H.R. 1, the big, beautiful bill that was passed over the summer, there was a clause in that required work requirements for Medicaid, and they're to take effect next year in 2027. And there are supporters on all sides of the spectrum that say, look, it requires some self-sufficiency and it would reduce some program costs. And then critics are saying, hey, but as soon as you institute these work requirements, research has shown that coverage decreases. And then people will end up in hospital emergency rooms and other places, or won't get care, and it will cost us more in the end. So in this county, there are about 155,000 people per month. Roughly 1 in 4 residents here in the Pikes Peak region are on Medicaid. 25% of the county of CD-5 is on Medicaid. So what do you think about this policy in Congress? And what's going to guide your decisions if you get elected on the work requirements? Because if you get elected in 2026, they would be implemented
in 2027.
In 2027.
When I take office.
So what do you think about that?
I think first and foremost, I think it's important to note, I don't believe there is, and we all know this, there is fraud, waste, and abuse in our system, and we should do everything we can to root that out and to ensure that we're not engaging in just random government handouts. That said, the other part of this is I believe that the sign of a healthy society is one that takes care of its most vulnerable and lifts up its most vulnerable and has a robust middle class. And we need to be thoughtful and strategic about when we are addressing fraud, waste, and abuse. And I know that that's what Jeff Crank and the Republican Congress, and they say they're doing in the One Big Beautiful Bill, but you have to be thoughtful and strategic about it. You can't just do it willy-nilly. And this policy and the policy in this particular policy in the bill, the effects of that are actually going to be taking 500,000 people off of their health care in Colorado. And what people forget is that when we reduce access to Medicaid, that impacts everyone, not just people on Medicaid. I think it's important to talk about the people on Medicaid, but that impacts health insurance premiums across the board. It impacts access to healthcare across the board and makes it more expensive for everyone. And we know that 400,000 people are going to lose, at least 400,000 people are going to lose their health care here in Colorado as a result of this policy. In addition, we know that health insurance premiums across the board are also going to go up. The system is integrated in a lot of complex ways. And so, do we need to make sure that we are good stewards of taxpayer dollars? Absolutely. Is this being a good steward of taxpayer dollars and taking care of the people of our community and Colorado? No.
Thank you. So speaking about healthcare, you just told me which I was going to ask, the Pit or Grey's Anatomy?
Oh, okay. I'm definitely a Pit. I can't believe Grey's Anatomy is still on. Somebody told me this
Neither
the other day.
can
I'm
I.
like, what? It's like in his 22nd season. It's crazy.
So one of Jessica's campaign staff is here, and I bet it's been on before she was born.
Probably, yeah.
In terms of Grey's Anatomy.
I know.
And it's still on. But what's interesting about the Pit is you're right, is that it's showing the stress of every day of healthcare, and it's showing and describes Medicaid.
Yep.
And its impact on hospitals, individuals, and the system.
Yep. It's a stressed system. We have a lot to fix in our healthcare system.
Would you be interested if they said, hey, Jessica, would you like to sit on the health committee? Is that a committee that would interest you at all?
Certainly it is. I think obviously there's a lot of work to do in that space, and it's an issue that impacts so many people here in our community. I think when I do think about the committees I will probably sit on, because we have 5 military bases here and I am an Army veteran, I do think the House Armed Services Committee would be a good choice. And as you may not know, I worked in the financial services industry. I worked at USAA for over a decade. And I think there's a lot of work to do also in home ownership and other critical affordability, cost of living issues in housing and loans. And I would think I could do some great work on the Financial Services Committee in that space.
Well, it's always good to be thinking about those things. So gave you me a great segue already. Talking about caregivers, Social Security, and women typically either because they may leave the workforce because they have children, or they're leaving the workforce early because they're caring for an elderly parent. I'm kind of in that space myself at this point in time. And so they're in and out of the workforce. They can ebb and flow. And so that tends to impact their Social Security. And so we know that women, when they get their Social Security statement, if they have one at all, it tends to be lower, and they tend to be less secure in retirement than men. And so there's gaps in Social Security eligibility. Yeah. Do you think there's one concrete federal policy that could be implemented to help change that?
I don't know about one policy. I think first and foremost, I think the underlying issue that you spoke to is women. The burden often falls on women more than men. It's just the way it is, to leave the workforce, to care for children, to care for their parents. And one issue that I know, I feel deeply about, and I know is impacting El Paso County in particular, is that we are living here in a childcare desert. And as someone who, I have 3 kids, 2 stepkids, a childcare, even when you do have access to affordable, high-quality childcare, it's always stressful. And as your kids get older, trying to work through what's the right balance, and depending on what job you have at the time. And we, being in a childcare desert, makes it even more stressful and honestly sometimes impossible. And what I'm hearing from women around our community is that they feel, a lot of times they can't even get a job that will pay the same as that the childcare will cost. Right. And that's why they have to leave the workforce, is because they literally, childcare costs more than they can actually make. And that is that's unforgivable. And we need to make sure we're giving First of all, we are shoring up our childcare systems here. And a couple things that have been done by Jeff Crank and the Trump administration are only making it harder for women in our community. Trump, in his never-ending, relentless vendetta against Colorado, has cut over $150 million in federal childcare funding here in the state. In addition, the Department of Defense, even though it's well funded, has cut back on its childcare facilities here in our community and across the military bases across the country. And what's that's ended up creating is exacerbating the childcare desert that we're in on the military bases in particular. We now have a situation where there's only enough slots for dual military families. And if you're a specialist with a couple kids, you need your spouse to be able to work. The other piece is that we've got to, though, attract jobs here into our community that pay well enough so that you can afford the childcare. So there's a lot of work to do, and including shoring up Social Security. And I just want to make sure that there's a lot of different policies we can do to make, put Social Security on a better long-term trajectory. And one of those that I talk about a lot is, if you make over $500,000, you stop paying into Social Security in like March or April. Why people who make a good earned income are not paying into Social Security throughout their entire careers, which would create more of a buffer
for
in
everyone.
the Social Security program for everyone, is amazing to me, and it's something that we need to address.
Yeah, and so one thing I would hope is that you would look at is that women who are in and out of the workforce for whatever reason, that they at least can that work that they're doing, either raising their children or caring for a family, is somewhat compensated as work because it is.
Work. Yes,
because it is, and then they're not looking at age when they're 65, 70 years old and looking at their own Social Security retirement statement and seeing $600 or $700 a month, which is not, of course, sustainable for anyone to live on.
No. That's why people feel like they can't retire.
That's why they can't retire.
Yep.
Exactly. Well, I understand. Yeah. Early childhood education is going to be a big issue here in El Paso County and Colorado Springs coming up, so it's going to be exciting to see. Pikes Peak Women had that on our last podcast.
Oh, did you?
We had Sherry Lynn.
Sherry Lynn? Yeah,
and
I've talked to her a lot about this issue, and she's a thought leader on this, and I think also somebody who's going to get good stuff done here. That it's absolutely, we're at mission critical point on childcare.
So I'd encourage anyone who wants to learn more about that to check out our last podcast on the childcare situation with Sherry Lynn Boyle. That was just recorded last month. All right, another movie question.
Okay.
Ready?
Yeah, sure.
Barbie or Legally Blonde?
Ooh, I love Legally Blonde. I mean, I'm old school that way. It's not that I didn't like Barbie, but, Reese Witherspoon is great. Like, you went to Harvard, I think it's awesome.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay.
I agree with that. Okay, so now let's get back to your military background, because that's a unique skill set for not for women. It's not unique here, but for somebody running for office out of Colorado Springs, we haven't had that. We've had former male military officers running for office here, but we've not had a woman. And the current administration has moved to restrict women in certain combat roles. And it's the home of several bases, including we're training young women at the Air Force Academy. How would you use congressional oversight to push back? And how would you do that?
Yeah, well, as I said, I'm hoping to be on the House Armed Services Committee, which would be the committee of jurisdiction to act on this. I think first and foremost, I just want to talk about women and their role in the military and in combat. Women are 20% of our armed forces. They have always been a critical part of our warfighting mission. When I was in the military, we were not yet allowed to be in combat arms branches. But make no mistake, the work that we did was very much in the combat space, and I think doing combat support work still puts you in the line of fire. There was a very thoughtful, very deliberate process that the military, that the DoD engaged in deciding to open up the combat arms to women. And it was all based on making sure that those women who elected, by the way, to go into the combat arms met the same criteria that the men, the physical criteria, all the things that you need to do to demonstrate that you can do the job. And that was phased in over the course of from 2013 to 2016. It was very thoughtful. And there are no women in combat arms right now who are not meeting the exact same standards as the men. And so to me, this is just straight up misogyny, straight up sexism, and it is a degrading of the valuable role that women play in the military. And I would certainly provide a great deal of oversight and put that in check and reinstate women in combat arms where they deserve to be if they earn it.
Thank you for that. I'm sure there's a fair amount of women that are already serving and the women that we are training 10 miles north of us at the moment that would be very interested in hearing that because they've gone through 4 years of school and training, and that may have been their goal. And
they should be able to achieve that goal.
Absolutely.
Yep.
All right. Another tough question.
Okay.
Penny Arcade in Manitou or the Manitou Incline?
I'm a Manitou Incline girl. I just did it actually with my sisters this fall. You may not know this about me. I used to be a longtime endurance athlete. I've done an Ironman. And so I love, I'm a goal-oriented person. I guess that sort of maybe goes hand in hand with running for Congress. But I love the idea. I don't have the time to do Ironmans anymore. But to me, the Manitou Incline is like there's a goal, you set it, you do it, and it feels good at the end. And I love that.
So either you're goal-oriented or you're glutton for punishment. Either one. Maybe either one. Either one. So
Are you Penny Arcade then?
Well, I do love a good hour or two at the Penny Arcade.
All right.
Grew up in Manitou, so that's my stomping ground. But now I'm going to ask you a question that came up that I looked for your website.
Yep.
And peruse them, and thank you. And for all of you who want to know more about Jessica, her background, her issues, there's a ton on her website, so feel free to Google it up. But I wanted to ask you a little bit about energy.
Okay.
And on your website, your platform calls for holding monopoly utility companies accountable and lowering energy costs. So here in El Paso County, utility regulation is largely out of Congress's hands because Black Hills has a little here in the district, and the other is regulated through Colorado Springs Utilities, which is regulated through the City Council. Right. And so the rates are set by City Council, which is interesting. So what can a member of Congress do to lower utility costs here in the district?
First, you mentioned my... go to killinforcolorado.com if you want to learn more about my policies. This is, El Paso County, when I think about, cost of living issues, and I'm not saying that people aren't feeling it in utilities, but you're right. Because of Black Hills and because of the Colorado Springs utility that's regulated by the City Council, we are not here feeling it as much as other parts of Colorado are and other parts of the country are that are mainly, Excel and have private sector ownership of the utilities. But I still think it's important to take care for all people and address cost of living issues and utility increases. I will say that when I think about the biggest cost of living issues here in our community, it's healthcare and health insurance premiums, which we've already discussed. Childcare, which we've already discussed a little bit, and happy to talk about that more, and then housing. And that's, to me, one of the biggest here is it's an interesting situation we have here as well, in that we have a mismatch in terms of housing stock and actual and wages. And what happened was, El Paso County has gone through a massive population boom over the last 5 to 10 years. And we had a bunch of real estate developers who built a bunch of $500,000 houses plus, which are now sitting empty. And we don't have enough housing stock in the 100,000, 200,000 condos, apartments. And we're playing catch up on that front. And that is something that I will say I would be, not saying I won't be focused on energy production. And I think we need to throw everything in the kitchen table at making sure that we have adequate energy, including renewables, but also, traditional forms of energy. But I do think one of the preeminent issues here on cost of living is addressing the housing crisis.
And certainly that has actually reached the ears of the president, because he kind of did address that the other night. But back to energy
Yeah,
a little
yeah.
bit. Are you for slowing down the transition to all renewables? Because a lot of Democrats would say, hey, we've got to transition to a renewable all green economy by 2030, 2035. And others are saying it's going to cost a lot. We need to slow that down, and we need to keep natural gas into the mix and integrate things slowly. Where are you on that? Because it is split the left side of the aisle on where you fall sometimes, whether it's all green all now or slowing it down doesn't mean you're not green, but you want to consider the costs and look at what's happening in this debate that's happening right now with Colorado Springs Utilities and the power plant, the coal-fired power plant. Where do you fall on that? What would you say to your constituents?
Right now, the biggest issue is addressing the cost of energy. And to me, we need to have all hands on deck, all forms of energy. We need to continue to move full steam ahead on renewables. First of all, because it is, we should all care about the future of our planet. And as I'm sitting here with you on a February day where it's been over 60 degrees like all week, that is a real thing. And we absolutely need to address that. But we can't just eliminate traditional forms of energy until we build up a more robust renewable platform. And, what I'm concerned about are the policies of Jeff Crank and Donald Trump that are pulling back on renewables. I was actually talking to a guy yesterday who is opening up he's working on LIHTC housing, like affordable housing here in our community. And a new development that he's working on, they figured out a way to create 80% of the energy would come from solar for that affordable housing development. They're still going forward in it. And with that plan, props to him for doing it. But he said it ended up because Trump and Crank cut back on the renewable tax credits that were passed into law during the Biden administration, that actually it's going to cost more than it should or would to do it. I like I said, I give him props for still doing this program and utilizing renewables in a cost efficient way, in a great low income housing low income housing development. But it is unfortunate that we are not, that Trump has pulled back on the investment in renewables. And I think those were smart and important investments that we need to make across the board.
Thank you for that.
Yep.
So we're getting towards the end of our time. So one last question, and it's the classic question. Okay.
What's
it's
that?
okay. No,
Okay.
It's not bad. It's not bad. Okay. Jessica Killin's hosting a dinner party, and you can have 3 women, dead or alive. It's a classic.
Okay.
Right? It's the New York Times question.
Yeah. Okay.
Who do you have?
I have been lucky throughout my entire life to be surrounded by strong, resilient sisterhood of women. I have 2 amazing sisters, an amazing mom, an amazing best friend that I served with back in the military way, way back when, and who, is still my best friend forever. And I think these women have been with me through thick and thin, have provided unconditional love. I also have an amazing daughter who's 22 and is actually going to be coming back after she graduates to work on the campaign. And when I think about who I want to spend my time with, especially now that I'm running for office, which isn't always surrounded by unconditional love. You're not always surrounded by conditional love when you're running for office. Would be my sisterhood. Probably my mom. Definitely my best friend. She lives in the Netherlands, and I don't get to see her enough. Yeah, her and her husband are doing a NATO assignment now. And my daughter, who, because she's away at college, I don't see her enough. But if I could fit in a couple others, I'd invite my sisters too.
Oh, okay. That says a lot about you. It reflects who you are. Is there anything like you want to wrap up when you want to talk to our listeners who in the Pikes Peak area and the district? If there's anything you'd like to say to them.
Yeah, I think I love doing podcasts. Hopefully people will also check out my website and come to one of my events. I think that the stark contrast that I'm presenting compared to Jeff Crank that I think will resonate with our community and is that I'm going to be out and about and engaged with everyone in our community, whether you are a liberal, a conservative, no matter who you are. And I think real representative leadership is listening and engaging with the community and working with the community on common sense solutions. And that's what my race is about. That's what I plan to do when I'm in Congress. And I'd love to hear from any and all people who want to make our country better and our community better.
There you have it. So thank you, Jessica. Again, if you're interested, you want to learn more about her, she's told you where her website is. And for all of you who might be listening to this podcast, go to caucus, engage, register to vote. Don't throw up your hands. You can make a difference. Help us out.
We can. We're going to win this.
Thanks a lot. Thank you,
Thanks so
Jessica,
much.
for being with
Thanks.
us today.
Bye-bye. Thanks.
Our second guest is here today, Zuri Horowitz, who is also running for the congressional seat for CD-5. And we are really pleased that she is joining us for the Pikes Peak Women podcast this morning. Thank you for joining us. There are several candidates running, and I wanted to mention, but because this is a podcast focused on women and amplifying women's voices, we are only speaking to the women candidates. So we spoke to Jessica Killin earlier, and now we are speaking to Zuri Horowitz. And thanks for joining us today. We are pleased to have you. So, Zuri, in 1 minute or less, why do you want this job when others are fleeing Congress? Why are you wanting to go?
Well, I believe we have really deep systemic issues due to corruption in government and money in government. And what we keep seeing, especially like with Trump and his cronies, like enriching themselves by $1.2 trillion, is that Citizens United and bank lobbyists and people like that take over our government and make it so that policy does not put people first. And I feel like our country is crumbling, and we need people in Congress who will fight for systemic change that will make people's lives better.
Thanks for telling us. That's a very good 30-second or under speech. I'm impressed. So we're going to, the way this is structured today, I've got some policy questions for you, and then I'm going to intersperse some fun questions for you, and that's how it's going to work. So we've got deep into some healthcare policy and some economic policy, and you know what I'm going to ask, and I've asked you and Jessica the same questions 90%, except for one that comes from your website. So let's get into this. If you're in King Soopers, looking at the cost of eggs, the cost of fruit, the cost of meat, and a woman comes up to you today and says, hey, I see that you're running for Congress. I work part-time, but I don't qualify for Medicaid, and the costs of the ACA, the private insurance, are astronomical. What are you going to do when you get to Congress? How can you help me?
Universal health care. We should have universal health care. That is the big fight. It is making sure that people are in Congress who are not beholden to lobbyists, who are not beholden to healthcare companies, who are here to make sure that people have universal health care. And what that could look like is a number of things. It could be Medicare for all. It could be Medicaid for all. 3 policies that I think are really important are making sure that insurance companies are nonprofits and heavily regulated, making sure that all medical facilities, including nursing homes, are nonprofit that are run by medical professionals, and making sure that the cost of drugs and services is established every 2 to 3 years, so that when you go to the doctor, you know what your bill is going to be, and then having it be a sliding scale in terms of income, and making sure that we're fully funded. Right now, Medicaid is facing close to $1 trillion in cuts over the course of 10 years. Medicare is also facing tons of cuts. And right now, Democrats closed the government, but then didn't hold strong. And we have the ACA subsidies that lapsed because we did not. If we're going to close the government, we better get our goal and make sure that people have ACA subsidies. Because I talked to people, I've talked to 4 people in 1 week, and they had lost their insurance and they could not afford it. And policy really matters. Policy changes lives. Policy that is bad kills people.
Are you hearing, when you're on the trail, are you hearing people talk about healthcare?
Yeah. I mean, like I always say, I work in healthcare. I'm an occupational therapist. I talk to my conservative male coworkers, and everyone is for universal healthcare. When, 60+% of people are for Medicare for all, which I would say is probably because that's the policy that has had the most amplification. I personally think Medicaid might be better. I've been on Medicaid. It was fantastic. Whenever I talk to other people who've been on Medicaid, lovely experience. Get in right away, no surprise bills, very straightforward, really enjoyable. So I would also support that. But I'm kind of like, if it's universal health care, I will support it and then try to find a way to make sure that it works for people. But yeah, we need universal health care. This is not a crazy thing. Whenever I talk about policy, I always like to look at other countries, and every other developed country has universal health care. Even undeveloped countries have universal health care. Countries that have way less money, but people are not going into debt or bankruptcy. We had a family friend that passed away due to pneumonia because he was too scared to go to the ER and get that bill.
Yeah, that it's probably more common than not. All right, so thanks for that. We're going to continue with some policy questions, but I'm going to throw in a fluffy question. Ready?
Yes.
Okay. Are you watching Bridgerton or are you watching The Diplomat on Netflix?
I'm not watching either.
She's not watching anything. Do you watch because you're too busy? Are you reading a book instead?
No, I'm like, all I want is Bridgerton is semi-historical. I want everything to be either it's got to be sci-fi or complete fantasy. I do not want anything dealing with reality on any level at all.
So tell our listeners what you're watching.
Oh God!
Since it's in the I world.
I love. Oh my God, The Expanse was like fantastic.
We want to learn this about you. It's important.
Yeah, I know, really deep. And The Expanse is like I love shows that go hard for like a theme and a like thought out idea and world. And The Expanse is just very clever. It explores politics. It explores colonialism. It explores all these different things. But it's also very clearly not the world we live in right now, so it doesn't feel personally threatening.
Well, these are things we want to learn about you. Voters want to know.
I was like being fun. I was like,
voters want to know. Yeah. Voters want to know. So keeping on the healthcare theme and keeping on Medicaid, and as I said earlier, we want to just make sure people really understand the difference between Medicaid and Medicare. Medicare is when you reach 65. It's an entitlement. Everybody gets it. Medicaid is not an entitlement. You have to income qualify or be disabled. So in July, the president passed H.R. 1, the big, beautiful bill, and Congress implemented work requirements as a part of Medicaid, and that will be implemented in 2027. And in Colorado Springs right now, 155,000 or a quarter of residents are on Medicaid. And so if you were elected in November, what would you do to change this policy? Or it may not be changeable, but what would you do? What do you think about work requirements? Because a lot of people think that that's fair, and that goes across the board. There's Democrats, there's Republicans that think there's people taking advantage of the system, and others that say, and critics say, hey, no, work requirements backfire. We end up with more sick people, and it just messes up our healthcare system and costs more. So where do you fall on that? And tell us more.
Let's just say I have
got a few opinions?
A few opinions about that. First off, 92% of people on Medicaid are already working, students, caretakers. It would be a huge waste of money. In Georgia, they did a recent implementation of a work requirement, and it costs twice as much. So it was $54 million. So we already have $1 trillion in cuts to Medicaid. And now we're going to add a huge administrative burden to cut into those benefits even more. That is a joke. The people that are taking advantage of healthcare, our health insurance companies, our drug companies, they are not people seeking healthcare. No one's like, wow, you know what? I can't wait to get my other kidney out. No one's like, I'm gonna take double the heart medication. I mean, I don't understand how you could be abusing healthcare. You know, they're not getting elective. Like, no one's getting like lip implants with this. I don't understand what the thought behind it is. Truly cruel and laughable. And I wish I wasn't as angry about it, but it really frustrates me because it would cost more to Medicaid that is already being like attacked, and it would just hurt people. And so in Congress, I would fight really hard to do whatever I could with whatever levers of power I have to get rid of that requirement, because it's such a waste of money, and it's such a waste, and like a huge part of what's wrong with health insurance is the administrative burden. So the idea of adding more of an administrative burden that costs more and takes more from healthcare just doesn't make any sense.
Well, how do you reply to those that say there has been some fraud in the system? Even here in Colorado, we've had a few issues as of lately that has shown that there has been some payment problems and other.
You can always look at how a program is administered, and you can look at whether, there's problems with making sure that things are put through correctly or that the system doesn't go down. But that's not the same thing as, and compared to us paying twice as much for healthcare, for private healthcare. Yeah, of course, every system is not perfect, but we're not paying twice as much for Medicaid. Medicaid's pretty darn efficient, whereas regular health insurance in the United States overall, we're paying twice as much. So I would look to that first and look to that corruption way before I'm going to be getting my eyes all over Medicaid and being really worried about that. I'm going to say, let's look at the health insurance companies that are denying care and then requiring tons of doctors' time to make sure that surgery that is required for breast cancer patients is allowed to pass. Let's look at that first, because that's pretty egregious. And yes, I'm sure there's some problems in Medicaid, but it does not reach the level of what's happening in private insurance.
So if you were elected to Congress, would you see yourself on one of the health committees?
Oh, I would love it.
See, there's a little passion there for the health health world. Have you been watching that show, The Pit?
I have. Again,
nope,
unless
because she's watching sci-fi.
Yeah,
okay.
Are they flying in the air, and do they have magic powers?
Gotcha. All right.
Sorry.
Gotcha. All right, so let me pivot on that. Are you listening to Pod Save America or Ezra Klein?
Truthfully, neither.
Neither of those.
404 Media I really like. I like Taylor Lorenz. I like Tech Won't Save Us. I have they're what we don't have enough of in mainstream coverage is tech coverage, mm-hmm. and so we kind of have gotten lost in the sauce. Sorry, I'm never fine about anything.
No, it's okay. What we want is for our listeners to get to know you.
Yeah, so
that's okay.
A big part of that is basically we'll have these things where we have to save kids from the algorithm, and we need IDs of young kids, and I'm all you're doing is providing tech companies with private information about your children instead of ensuring that everybody is protected and that everybody's privacy and likeness and information is protected. And so that's so that's what I'm learning from my little boring tech podcast.
That's okay. It's, as I said, we just want people to get to know you better. Speaking of I don't know about tech, but just today heard that Square is cutting 4,000 people. So we're going to just talk a little bit about economic security and women who step out of the workforce for whatever reason, maybe to have children, to care for children, care for an elderly parent, or get penalized due to lost wages and gaps in their Social Security. So when they hit 67 and they see their Social Security statement, they might be a little shocked to say, my goodness, I can't live on this, right? It's much lower than they anticipated. What policies would you pursue? What do you think about when you talk about this issue?
I've got three that I, quickly looking up. For childcare, Senator Elizabeth Warren and Rep. AOC have a $10 a day childcare plan, which would be wonderful for families to not have that burden. And locally, we have, I think, 16,000. We're missing 16,000 childcare spaces, and that's something that we have to work on. Both citywide, statewide, looking at some of the one of the regulations, and making sure that when childcare providers are applying, they don't have to duplicate their applications. That's a little bit of something more statewide. And then there's a policy there's a ballot measure that might be coming up, but I'm not sure if it's fully funded based on what they're asking the tax to be. It might not bring in enough money.
You mean the local one?
Yeah,
that's
the local
being discussed.
one. Yeah. It might be a sin tax.
Just a pitch with that. Sherry Lynn was on this podcast
maybe you'll
a
give me an
week or two
update.
ago.
Yeah.
And I think she talked about it, but there's some local efforts, and continue.
Yeah, so I just want to make sure that one, if we are going to put a tax in, even if it's more unpopular, that we make the pitch so that when the policy passes, it does address the need and doesn't just burden local businesses that are already struggling. But that's another thing. And then there's making sure that IDEA, I never say it right, is fully funded, basically for like students with disabilities, that they get full funding, which they haven't ever gotten in schools, so that those students and those parents have the resources they need in public schools to have support. And then the other one is Senate Bill 3271 from Senators Booker and Kim to authorize grants for the support of family caregivers, so that there's money there for family caregivers. And that's one I have to explore a little bit more.
Right. So it's probably been introduced, but
it hasn't gotten very far.
Not very far, right. So because we are in Colorado Springs and the current administration has changed its policy on women in combat, what are you thinking about that? And we're home to several bases. A lot of our bases have women, and of course the Air Force Academy is training women in combat. How would you use your congressional authority or oversight to push back on that? What would you do?
I think we need to impeach and remove Pete Hegseth for numerous reasons, but I think, security breaches, bombing other countries without having Congress's oversight. There's a lot of reasons, but he's also attacked women. He's he shut down the Defense Advisory Committee on Women in Service. He shut down the Defense Department's Women, Peace, and Security program. He fired Coast Guard Commandant Admiral Linda Lee Fagan. He ousted Admiral Lisa Franchetti, the first female chief of naval operations, Air Force Lieutenant General Jennifer Short, Vice Admiral Shoshana Chatfield. He has targeted women over and over and over again. And I think if we don't have him out of leadership, if we don't have leadership that's thoughtful, there's really no way to rein him in, because he's very clear about what his prerogative is, and that is to make women's lives miserable. They've also removed, I think, abortion care at the VA. So I feel like we need a fresh slate of leadership to reestablish, make sure that the Department of Defense actually serves all of the enlisted people, rather than, I don't even know if he's serving anyone at this point.
Mm-hmm. Okay, another fun question, and I know this one you can answer because it does not involve dragons or
okay.
or things like that. And you're a Colorado Springsite. You're native to the region, so. Penny Arcade, Manitou Penny Arcade, or the Manitou Incline?
Incline.
All right. Wow, okay. One of the things you mention on your website, which I think is interesting, is your platform calls for fully funding public schools. Mm-hmm. And you already mentioned the IDEA, but that's over in the kind of the special education bucket. So how do you think we're going to fund public schools? How does Congress have oversight of that, given our public school system?
Okay, sorry. Before 1970, when you would go to school, you could pretty much have a part-time job, and you would not graduate with debt. And
you mean higher education?
Higher education.
Okay.
So for higher education, it would be that funding was about 50% from the state and about 45% federal, and with grants for specific types of. And so that's where we could allocate money. The other way for us in Colorado, it's Tabor. That is a huge issue for public schools up and down, high school, middle school. We don't have enough tax funding to fully fund our schools, to make sure that teachers are making a living wage, that they are able to live in their community. They can't afford it. I mean, you look at, I think Harrison School District was making tiny homes for teachers, which when you think about it, that says a lot about how much we're paying teachers when when they can't just live in their community. So that, I think, making sure that teachers have a living wage. And when you have teachers who have a living wage, when you have an attractive job, because this is a job that requires master's degrees, then you can attract world-class talent. Right now in Colorado, we are close to last in terms of comparably educated people in terms of how much we pay our teachers. So we're just basically asking people to teach out of the goodness of their heart rather than making sure that it's a job that really supports them and makes sure that they're successful. And so to me, that's fully funding, and then making sure that our schools are maintained, making sure that our schools prioritize walkability, bikeability, transit, so that parents don't have to drive their kids around everywhere they go.
But if I'm sitting here in Colorado and I push back on you and I say, well, Zuri, schools are funded through property taxes mostly. Mm-hmm. Well, now they are. They're funded mostly through property tax, and some state. The feds do some monies, but they're in the Title I or Title IV areas. But most of our schools are funded through property taxes and some state general fund. So what could Congress do to help fund our K through 12?
Yeah, I guess I should be more clear on my website. I'm talking more about higher education.
Okay, so you're talking about higher ed.
Yeah, higher ed, trade school, that kind of thing, because that is where more of the funding would come from. Public schooling, I mean, ideally, one thing that I am trying to learn more about is the way that we allocate funding per school, because there's an issue, and this is statewide, but if we were to maybe have federal regulations in terms of how we allocate money, I think that would be a place to start to make it more fair, because it is complex. So when it comes to like a rural school, you're going to need more funding per student, even though it's a smaller school, because they need the same amount of utilities and enrichment as a larger school. So you kind of have to figure that out.
And they don't have the property and they don't have the property tax base.
And they don't have the property tax base. And right now what happens is we'll do like a mill levy for schools, and that always is going to benefit wealthier districts, because that's kind of cutting off where we're missing. So I think federally, if we were a little clearer about how we did funding to make it a little bit more equitable for people, it would also motivate people to invest in their public schools. Because if you are going to have to spend this much money, if you knew that every school that you went to, it was well funded, well maintained, well done, it would be a little bit more like Finland, where the schools are pretty equitable and wealthy parents send their kids to those schools. And it's like, that's always my thing, is I want more people to be getting serviced by the government than less, because then we're all a lot more invested in it succeeding.
So going back to higher ed, let's talk a little bit about that. Higher ed's been in the crosshairs of many people. The cost of higher ed has gone up. I mean, you went to Colorado College, not here in this community.
Well, I mean, we were broke, so I got a lot of financial aid.
And to CC's credit, I think they've tried to.
It was less expensive than going to Boulder. So it would have been more expensive to go to Boulder than go to CC.
But back to higher ed, there's been a lot of criticism around higher ed and different degree programs, and what should be funded and what shouldn't be funded, and what kind of degree should be funded and what shouldn't be funded, and should there be more investment in community college and trade schools. What do you think?
I think let's look at our present day. We are ruled by a bunch of college dropouts that did not take any humanities courses. And I think we're seeing the end result of what happens when people don't take any humanities courses.
Interesting.
So I went to CC.
And why keep going on that? Why do you think if they had taken poli-sci or history?
Yeah, I don't, maybe. And so it's like they have, when you look at like the Epstein files and you look at how juvenile they are when they talk about their vision of the world and how small they think for people with so much money. And I think it comes from not being curious or well educated and putting money first above all else. And I think it really speaks to the need to reinvest in humanity. We don't know when we Everybody is different. Everybody is stronger in different areas. We don't know when it comes to innovation who's going to innovate. But when we have a good education system that supports a bunch of different types of people who then don't go into major debt learning and they're able to pursue their passions, then we allow for innovation. Right now, we're stuck with AI, which I have not seen any positive impact on. They looked at it economically and it has had almost no positive change in, I think, the GDP. So when we invest in humanities, I came from Colorado College and it wasn't always my favorite place. The block plan was not great for me. I'm a slow over time learner, but I learned critical thinking and it really served me well. And you don't always think what I'm really good at is reading comprehension, which is what a weird thing to be good at. That's not a skill that everyone's like, well, let's bank on that, not even a great writer, just good reading comprehension. But it has served me over and over again. It serves you when you're looking at bills. It serves you when you're trying to anticipate whether something is safe or unsafe. It serves you when you're trying to make a plan. And people have different skill sets. And when we do not invest in education, we kill our future. We do not attract world-class talent. We do not attract innovation. And so I actually, it's to me, it's a form of control when we start to question learning.
As you've been traveling around the district for the past few months, what issues are you hearing about that maybe we didn't cover today? What are people saying to you? What are they bringing up? Especially women in particular.
The childcare one came up a lot. I would say, because I'm an advocate for walkability, bikeability, transit, and affordable housing, and I haven't been as active as I want to be, and I've been seeing the city do a lot to make it harder for families and women. Closing bathrooms, 10 bathrooms in parks, closing, I want to make sure I have the right, closing Meadow Park Community Center. That takes away third spaces. Third spaces are places where young people can go free of charge, not worrying about if they have enough money to play with friends and have a way around. And then just recently, the Southeast Plan, City Council decided not to vote on that. And so when we don't make a city that is accessible for people, when we ban people from being homeless but don't provide them with housing, we make a more unfriendly place to live. We make a more difficult place for families to live. We make it harder. If you have a community center that if you're working, your kid can go there and you can drop them off and have that time, or have somebody else drop them off. Those kids can walk there or bike there and take transit instead of you having to drive them when you're working a 12-hour shift. That makes it easier on families. When you're homeless and you have a place to go to the bathroom, that makes you more likely to be able to take care of yourself. When you have a vert park for skaters, it gives young people a place to play. We all have to invest in our community and make it easier for people to live their lives. And right now I'm kind of sad to see that a lot of that public area is not being maintained. And those public areas make it less likely for people to commit crimes because they're less desperate, because they're safer, because they're not running around trying to figure out where their next meal is, or, needing to, stealing stuff because they don't have any money or they lost their identity card and now they need to buy a new ID. When we destabilize people, when we don't do preventative things that make our community more community-oriented and thrive, we make people more desperate. We make it a meaner place to live. And I lived in West Hollywood and it got really expensive. And as I noticed it getting really expensive, we had more homeless people on the street. We had meaner neighbors. All of our local businesses that were, our improv, our local restaurant went out of business. And it just became a meaner, sadder place to live. And that's why it's always important to invest in your community, because helping homeless people helps you. It makes you have a better place to live. Having open community centers makes it easier for families to have a place to go and have support. And so that's, yeah.
Well, thank you. And here's the last classic New York Times question. Ready?
Okay.
And again, I don't think maybe it would involve a sci-fi character or a dragon or something. Dinner party, 3 guests, living or dead, women. Who would you invite?
So, okay, I'll do the dead people.
That is fine.
Joan of Arc, Rosa Parks, and Queen Elizabeth I. Just as like a very typical young...
Queen Elizabeth I. Why her?
Well, she was the Virgin Queen. She ruled England for a really long time in patriarchy. It would be interesting to see. It would actually be very interesting to see what she was like. You know what I mean? Like, how did you get there? How did you maintain that? What was going on? Was it good? Was it bad? Mm-hmm. You know, was it just that you were there for a really long time?
Right.
Yeah.
Do you have any live people? Do you have any people
Well,
who are
I mean,
alive?
like, I'm always like a nerd. I'm like a Nancy Hensham and Kimberly Gold and like, you know what I mean?
Well, I bet that could be arranged.
I know. I mean, I know them. So, but like, or like AOC and Elizabeth Warren, it would be like, you know, just people that I could talk policy about when it comes to the government. That's like who I would be.
AOC and Elizabeth Warren?
Yeah. Ilhan Omar, she's like dealing with so much and she's done so well considering all the attacks on her. Right. Yeah.
Well, to our listeners, today you've had an opportunity to listen to two of our candidates, of the several candidates that are running for have the opportunity to run against current Congressman Jeff Crank. Again, if you would like to learn more about Zuri, they can check out your website.
Zuri for CD5.com, ZURIFORCD, the number 5.com.
You heard it there. And if you want to participate in the caucus this week, where the playoff starts, the road to the primary begins. It begins on March 6th. Go to the Colorado Secretary of State.
March 3rd, 4th, or 5th. If you're a registered Dem, you can check your caucus location at the EPCO Dem website. Look up Precinct Finder. You have to have been a registered Dem by about February 9th through 11th.
Okay, there it is. I was corrected. It is not March 6th. For some reason, I thought it was, but March 5th, 3rd, 4th, 5th. It's 3 days here. These are your local meetings. Please, if you're a registered Democrat, this is how you can have an impact on who gets onto the ballot. If you are one of these folks that gets your ballot in June and you think, how did these names appear? Or how maybe you don't know any of them, or your favorite candidate is or isn't listed on the ballot. This is the way you can have an impact, is to engage in this process. So please make a difference. Next week, go to your caucus and participate. Thank you again on behalf of Pikes Peak Women for listening. Thank you, Zuri, for coming today. We appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Welcome.